Joining us in studio is Keith Levenstein, Econoserve Group Chairperson. Good evening to you. Gilbert Mosina is Black Business Council Vice President. He'll join us on the phone line. We have Busisiwe Ngwenya, a BBBE Commission and Acting Executive Manager in the Compliance Division. Good evening to you, ma'am, and thanks so much for your time. Just bring us up to speed. Let's recap, because for a long time we're trying to define what the policy, the shape, the size of the BBBE framework and guidelines were going to be.
When the legislation was put into place in 2003, it was just a policy framework, and it was hoped that everybody will buy into transformation, because when you remember pre-94, black people could not participate in certain activities. For instance, growing up, all we knew was that you had to be a nurse or a doctor. There were limitations. And also, you could not participate in the economy fully. Obviously, we had the spazas and bomama selling amagunya, but we could not buy shares on the stock exchange. Some of us didn't even know that there was such a thing. So when the policy was put into place, it was to try and open up. The objectives really was to say, we want to see black people managing, controlling, and owning the assets of the country, and given that they are in the majority, that was the intention. And also to make sure that we skill them, and not just skilling, but making sure that you also give them skills in the critical areas where they scarce skills, because normally what you'll be told is to say we cannot hire black people in certain areas, because they are not skilled, or there's scarce skills. So the legislation was to say, okay, if you're saying you cannot get black people into those industries, skill them and give them the correct skilling. And also, when you're talking management control, it wanted to make sure that you don't keep black people just at your low entry levels, but actually that they get and move up the ladder. So what we found was that with the policy was that because there was no monitoring mechanism, everybody interpreted the legislation any way they wanted, and that's why we heard of gardeners holding 26% shareholding, but not even knowing what that means, or domestic workers being used so that people could get government contracts. So then the amendments came into effect on the 24th of October 2014. This was to make sure then that there's a monitoring mechanism to oversee that the legislation is implemented the way it should be. Because what was seen was that there was a prevalence of fronting, and also there was misalignment. You find that there will be poor pockets where there's transformation issues that are dealt with. This policy will be saying something else. So this legislation was put into place to make sure that we align all these policies. And also, when you look at the codes of good practice, there's generic, and then there's your sector codes. Sector codes, you would find that some of them were not aligned with the generic, because they were done, some of them in 2007 and all that. So it was to make sure that you also align those sector codes so that they all talk to the same issues of transformation. And also it came with a trumping provision to say, in instances where there's misalignment, then we can invoke the trumping provision to say then this legislation will trump all other transformation policies that are not talking to issues of transformation, but also now bringing in issues of penalties, issues of investigating, or where the Commission can on its own initiate investigations where they think there's a contravention that is taking place.
And thank you for that, because the context is very important, so that we have clarity as to why there was a necessity in the first place to have government intervention when it comes to issues of transformation. And it's still so sad, Keith. I mean, you've almost become a pioneer or champion of exposing the reluctance of established big business to transform, and not seeing this as a necessity or an imperative for an inclusive economy. In your view, why still do we have this issue of fronting, or rather trying to subvert proper channels in doing the right thing?
Indeed, Cindy, many companies simply aren't prepared to transform. They don't recognize the reason to do so. They don't recognize enough of a need to do so, which is obviously an imperative. The other problem is they know they can get away with it. And they've been doing that for a long time. And if you ask a company to do something where you can do something in a different way, in a cheaper way, or an easier way, he will actually get round to doing it that way. And since 2007, these companies have been getting away with the fronting. Each year, we've seen them pushing the envelope just a little bit. To right now, 10 years later, they are operating with absolute impunity. They can do virtually whatever they want. Nobody is actually following up with them. I know the B Commission is sitting with me right now, but we aren't seeing anything. Not very much is happening. There's been 1 or 2 court cases, but everybody else is doing whatever they please. They see it as being difficult, and arguably B is difficult. The earlier codes were a lot easier. Right now the codes are certainly difficult, but not impossible to achieve. And if only companies would see it in that particular respect, they would actually see how they could benefit out of it rather than simply seeing this as just a penalty or a punitive measure.
And how do you get around that? In changing the paradigm that this is indeed beneficial in the long run, will create a more vibrant economy, better opportunity for people, and having disposable income, employment, etc. How do you get around to companies understanding that their role is critical in this economic transformation?
We look at it as a way of twofold. The first one is that from our side, we also have to educate, and which is why we've been holding information sessions. But also when you look at Section 9 and Section 10 of the Act, it gives government departments a role to play, because it says, for instance, when you're giving out concessions, when you're giving out licenses, when you're giving out incentives, you need to require or set higher standards. The codes will tell you that the generic will tell you that you want 26% shareholding, but then nothing stops a state entity to say, for this particular project or for this particular sector, we rather want 51%. The only thing is that they have to via through their minister to our Minister of Trade and Industry to ask for an exemption to deviate higher or have set aside. But I mean, we could be using these instruments. For instance, when somebody wants a water license, what's to stop the Department of Water and Sanitation to say, for us to issue water licenses, we require companies that want to get those licenses to have 51%.
But why is that not being done, or even having a demerit system? Because exactly that collusive behavior you were talking about, and trying to shortcut ways of avoiding transformation. We've seen companies essentially just working it into their budget at the end of the financial year. In terms of the penalties, 10% annual turnover is really a drop in the ocean for them. So should we get to that point where there's a demerit system and eventually possibly losing your trading license?
When you look at the penalties now, it doesn't just talk about the turnover. It says also government entities can actually cancel contracts where contracts were given based on misleading information or false information. But it also says that National Treasury can keep a list of defaulters, or we can also be barred from dealing with the states for up to 10 years. So really, it's up to the willingness of everybody to now implement what is in the legislation. It's not like we don't have the provisions. We have the provisions, but there needs to be a willingness to start actually implementing those provisions, because I think one thing people have been carrying on and doing what they've been doing is that there's not been, first of all, penalties, these kind of penalties where people should actually feel the pain. Because imagine if you get a tender for 1 billion and all of a sudden that tender is cancelled based on the misleading information that you would have provided. Or where the government says, for the next 10 years, we're not going to be dealing with your company because you are actually shortchanging transformation.
It may not even be misleading. It could just be presented in such a way that it appears to be altruistic. It appears to be complying with the law. I mean, you cited the example that, you know, there's only 1 or 2 prosecutions that we've seen in terms of fronting.
To me, that's the big problem. Yes, we have a big stick. The Act itself does lay down a harsh penalties, and 10% of turnover is a lot. It's not 10% of profits. It's 10% of turnover, 10 years in jail. Sounds lots and it sounds really harsh, but it isn't applied. I don't know of anybody who's gone to jail in the past year as a result of this. I have submitted hundreds, if not 1,000 different complaints to the DTI and eventually the B Commission over the past year and a half. And I try to work very closely with them. Nothing happens, Cindy. That's the problem. We have a right, yes. There is a huge stick that can be thrown at somebody. We could go along and say you're going to have...
to interject, we have not received hundreds of complaints.
I personally have sent hundreds of complaints through to the DTI and to
and what kind of responses have you? Or maybe just give us the essence of your complaints. What is the nature thereof?
There's so many of them. One of the early ones was a verification agency who decided to do 2 verifications or issue 2 certificates 8 months apart using the same data. We asked for some form of a comment on it at least, if not to stop that particular thing, because basically the guy extended his certificate for a year. I haven't received a response yet. What about the one that the white man, Mr. Serfontaine, I can't give you any more details, unfortunately, white man who went along and issued an affidavit stating that he's black. I submitted this thing in December of last year. I still haven't received a response. He isn't in jail yet. He should be in jail because he committed perjury. And this isn't a small company. This is a couple of hundred million rand turnover. Nothing has happened. He knows he can get away with it. Thousands and thousands of companies are doing the exact same thing. And I went on a little bit of a Twitter spree a couple of days ago because we ourselves received a telephone call from a competing consultant without realizing who we are. And this particular lady, and I won't give you the exact words that she said about who her company is, but she said, we have a way to help you become compliant and reach level 2 without your certificates and without losing control of your company.
My goodness.
But
all right, we're going to require those details to investigate further, Keith. With your
these details have been submitted to the B Commission many times.
We started operating from the 6th of June, 2016, which Keith is aware of. And when a person complains, also there's engagement between the complainant. But the same way that you'll go to the police station and lodge a criminal case or whatever, they have to investigate. You cannot just come and say, Busi made at my child, and then they go and arrest Busi without following processes to actually investigate and take forensics and all that. So with us, we get a year, up to a year to investigate a case, and also the respondent has a right to respond. So you cannot come and say Cindy has done APC, and then we just take your word for it, because we have to do our own.
But what's your success rate in terms of, or how far have you come in the year under review?
We have had a few cases that we have now settled, but then within the next few weeks we will be issuing out, because once an investigation is completed, we have to issue out the findings with recommendations. So those will be published. Everybody will be aware of those. So we'll be publishing within the next few weeks the cases that we have added up.
All right. Well, we also joined on the phone line Gilbert Mosina, a Black Business Council Vice President. Thank you so much, Mr. Mosina, for your time. I mean, it just becomes even more increasingly frustrating when we talk about a country that is majority disenfranchised people, poverty, inequality, unemployment, almost being treated as if it's the architect of black people being in the position that we are. And when the government tries to intervene to try and create more equality, we're met by all these other attempts, criminality in essence of fronting. How has this impacted on the whole transformation agenda, Mr. Mosina, in your space as a Black Business Council?
Yeah, good evening, yourself and the listeners. I must say that, look, as Black Business Council, honestly speaking, we are very, disappointed that we are where we are today with the Black economic empowerment, which really, does not seem to be working. I mean, our government need to be very, very decisive. We need to, see people indeed going to jail for doing the fronting. I mean, there is no way in which we can, still continue for many, many years. I mean, we have been in the space for almost 25 years, but there hasn't really been a company or people who are actually, engaged in fronting who have been charged. I mean, really, something needs to be done, and it must be done radically. So we intend...
I think so part of the question, sorry, Mr. Mosina, is that can we quantify the damage that has been done or even potential business lost because of this practice?
Well, that can be quantified. Definitely it can be quantified, but you must also understand that the whole thing, I mean, it's not really working. I mean, there are so many people who actually went into mining, and today they are nowhere. The way these things are structured. Perhaps we now need a government to come out clearly. If it means a government must come and, come with a minister dedicated for BE implementation as well as, indigenization. Let us go that route, because people are being taken for a ride. deals are being designed, but at the end of the day, our people are, find themselves out of, those empowerment processes.
All right,
Because,
now as a country, with all of us having vested interest to raise our children, we don't have dual citizenship. The best thing is to work together for an egalitarian society, and we can only do that if we share in the wealth of this country. But for those who do not comply, what other mechanisms, in your view, Mr. Mosina? Active citizenry, is it to boycott those companies, name and shame, have a registrar of those that are anti-transformation?
In fact, what we are aiming to do as Black Business Council, we want to really consult with government on this specific issue. And we'll provide a recommendation to government what steps need to be taken. I mean, look, if we find companies which are still practicing funding and so on, we need to be taking drastic actions. And the money that, that punishment or, penalties which are being charged should actually be put into a dedicated fund like BE fund, which can actually, access by BE, companies to go into business. So really, we can no longer wait for any further day on this particular matter, because we're taking it up with government now. And we also consult with the BE Commission, because obviously we understand in the past we haven't really been working with them very closely. But we want to deal with them in such a way that together we'll identify those people, we'll report those people to the BE Commission and see what can be done.
All right, Mr. Mosina, you can hear the ambience. You're driving. Your line is not that great, but thanks indeed for your time. Gilbert Mosina, Black Business Council Vice President. We're still in studio with Busisiwe Ngwenya, Triple BE Commission Acting Executive Manager in the Compliance Division, and Keith Levenstein, Econ Serve Group Chairperson. Just a tweet here, and it's almost a sense of helplessness. And your response to the invitation to join us, Moshe says, sadly, we have a government with good policies, but no capacity and a will to do oversight, and they also fail to take punitive measures. This is bad. Is that your sense, that we have a government essentially with all the instruments, but it's not well coordinated, Keith?
Certainly, we've got an excellent set of rules. The B Code, the B Act itself, if you read it, dating back to 2003, it's a good act. It makes a lot of sense. The B Codes also are a good set of codes. Yes, as I said earlier on, it has got a bit more difficult sometimes, but we've got a good set of policies. The problem is, and please understand, I've been in this industry since 2005. I've seen this happen. Now, 2005, we started seeing people starting to front because that was the first thing they thought of. 2007, 2009, when the sector codes came out. We ourselves went to the DTI and suggested that they create a concept of an ombudsman, which eventually evolved in their own way into something better called the B Commission. Then the new Act came out in 2013. That was 6 years after the fronting started. We're now sitting in 2017, exactly 10 years later. I have the exact same frustrations. I'm about to give up and say, what is the point of this? I'm the last consultant in the country who supports BEE and the B Commission the way I do. I was one of two people who were invited to speak at the launch of the B Commission. I was so proud to do so. We invited the B Commissioner to speak at our own conference, and we were very proud to have her with us. I've got such a sense of despair. I don't know what to do. Every day we hear of these companies doing, and I know that you've got to go through due process and understand due process. But when you see something that is so obviously wrong, it shouldn't take between last year, June, or the previous year, May, and I was on the Minister's task group in 2015. We issued our own report, and the Minister has to now decide what he wants to say on that particular thing. But
EconoServe, sorry to break your word, EconoServe, it doesn't have to be the exception to the rule of companies that want to conduct business in an ethical
and it's
and
not
in the
simply
interest
because
of,
I must say it, because otherwise the other consultants and professional verification professionals that are watching us right now, they might think that because we have had other professionals reporting misconduct. So it's not just Keith himself who has raised issues. There are other cases that we would have investigated and finalized right now that would have come from others who are now, because also there is an obligation actually under Section 13.0 to say when a verification professional comes across contravention or misleading information or false information, they have an obligation to report it to the commission, and they have been reporting. But also we need to talk about the limitations within the legislation. Unlike your competition commission or your company's IP, CIPC, they have they have tribunals. We don't have a tribunal. So once we have done our own investigation, we have to via through your NPA to go to the courts. So that's another limitation that you will find. So much as people will want to see cases being taken to court and through the criminal process, with us we cannot via through a tribunal so that cases can be settled very quickly. We have to via through your NPA. So when you investigate, we have to make sure that by the time we take our findings to them, we are quite clear about the cases, because imagine if you take 8 months or 9 months to investigate a case and then it gets to NPA, they say there's nothing for us to investigate. And then when you go to courts, some of them will not take commercial crimes more seriously than if, for instance, somebody was murdered. But I mean, we do appreciate what people are doing, even Economy, when they do.
What would satisfy you in the immediate that is within the ambit of the law and within the limitations of the BEE Commission?
Yeah, look, I know the BEE Commission is under a lot of pressure, and I understand that. Everyone else is also under pressure for pretty much the same reason. They've only been around for, a year and a half or so, which does make it difficult. But this has been going on for such a long time. What I would love to see is for the BEE Commission to identify just 1 or 2 very blatant issues of fronting. Put those people in jail. Simple as that. When I say that, yes, I know we've got to go through the MPA, but there is an act. If the MPA and obviously a judge makes that determination, then once one person is in jail or one person is fined, at the moment there is the slap on the hands. Nothing is happening, and there are lots of blatant issues. I know that, again, the BEE Commission has got a lot of things to do, but 1 or 2 bigger things would really put everybody in line.
Okay, Keith, we'll continue this on social media. Thanks indeed.
Thank you.
He is the star of transformation. I think for the month you get that award. And Busisi Ngwenya, thanks so much. Triple BEE Commission and Acting Executive Manager for Compliance Division. And Keith's company is EconoServe. That's ECONOSERV. And you can follow them online as well. And that's where we'll leave it for this evening. Thanks again for joining us. From myself and the crew, we are abundantly blessed. Up next, the beautiful game with Helen Moleko. Cheers for now.